They called him the world's strongest man, but today, the wrestling world feels weaker than it's ever been. Mark Henry is gone, and if you're not absolutely furious about how this man was treated in his final years, then you haven't been paying attention to the complete travesty that was his career's twilight. While social media floods with fake condolences and hollow tributes from the same wrestling personalities who ignored Mark Henry when he was alive, when he was struggling, when he needed the wrestling community's support, I'm here to tell you the truth that nobody else has the guts to say. Mark Henry deserved so much better than what this industry gave him, and his passing today after a heart attack is a devastating reminder of how we failed one of our greatest. You want to know what's really sickening? 3 months ago, Mark Henry was begging for work. 3 months ago. The same man who lifted cars, who broke records, who gave WWE some of its most memorable moments was practically pleading for opportunities while inferior talent got million-dollar contracts. But where were all these tearful tributes then? Where was the outpouring of support when he actually needed it? I'm about to expose the ugly truth about how Mark Henry was systematically pushed aside, disrespected, and forgotten by an industry that owes him everything. And if this doesn't make your blood boil, then you're not a real wrestling fan, you're just another casual observer who only cares when it's too late. Mark Henry's death isn't just a loss, it's an indictment of everything wrong with professional wrestling today. The man who could legitimately claim to be the strongest human being on the planet was reduced to begging for indie bookings while social media influencers with zero wrestling ability got featured spots on major programming. Tell me that doesn't make you sick to your stomach. Let's start with the facts that WWE doesn't want you to remember. Mark Henry's final WWE contract negotiations in 2023 were an absolute disgrace. Here's a man who gave the company over 2 decades of his life, who performed through injuries that would have ended lesser men's careers, who was a locker room leader and mentor to countless wrestlers, and WWE offered him a pathetic backstage role with a salary that wouldn't cover his monthly expenses. But it gets worse. Much worse. When Mark Henry expressed interest in continuing to wrestle, citing his passion for the business and his physical capability, WWE executives literally laughed at him. Laughed. At Mark Henry. The same executives who greenlit matches for wrestlers half his ability because they had the right look or social media following. You know what's really infuriating? Mark Henry never complained publicly. Not once. Even when he was being disrespected, even when he was being overlooked, even when inferior talent was getting opportunities he deserved, Mark Henry maintained his dignity and professionalism. He took the high road while everyone else took advantage of his character. The wrestling media is already publishing their sanitized obituaries, talking about his Hall of Fame career and his legendary strength. But they're conveniently forgetting to mention how they ignored him when he was alive. When was the last time you saw a major wrestling publication do a feature on Mark Henry? When was the last time a wrestling podcast brought him on as a guest? When was the last time the wrestling journalists showed him any respect? Here's what really happened in Mark Henry's final years, and this is going to make you absolutely furious. AEW, the company that claims to respect wrestling legends, that prides itself on treating wrestlers better than WWE, they had multiple opportunities to sign Mark Henry. Multiple. He reached out through intermediaries, he expressed interest in working with younger talent, he even offered to work for below-market rates just to stay active in the wrestling world. Tony Khan's response? Complete silence. Not even the courtesy of a rejection. Just ghosted one of the most respected figures in wrestling history like he was some nobody trying to break into the business. And now Khan will probably tweet some hollow condolence like he actually cared about Mark Henry's legacy. The independent wrestling scene wasn't any better. Promotions that book YouTube wrestlers and retired MMA fighters with zero wrestling training somehow couldn't find a spot for Mark Henry. Couldn't find a spot for a legitimate strongman who could still go in the ring, who could teach younger wrestlers, who could sell tickets based on his name alone. But here's the part that's going to make you absolutely livid. Mark Henry's final wrestling appearance was at a small indie show in Texas last month where he was paid $500. $500. For Mark Henry. A man who drew millions of dollars for WWE, who headlined pay-per-view events, who was a legitimate attraction whenever he stepped into a ring. Meanwhile, that same weekend, WWE was paying social media influencers more than that just to attend WrestleMania weekend events. Not to wrestle. Not to perform. Just to show up and post Instagram stories. Tell me that doesn't make you want to put your fist through a wall. The health issues that ultimately led to Mark Henry's heart attack today weren't a secret. The wrestling community knew he was struggling. Former wrestlers knew he was having financial difficulties. The dirt sheets knew he was dealing with medical expenses that his WWE pension couldn't cover. But nobody stepped up. Nobody offered help. Nobody showed the same loyalty to Mark Henry that he showed to the wrestling business for over 25 years. You want to know what's really pathetic? Triple H, the same man who now runs WWE Creative, who claims to respect wrestling history and veteran talent, had the opportunity to bring Mark Henry back in a meaningful role multiple times over the past 2 years. Mark Henry reached out personally, offered to work as a trainer, as a mentor, as an on-screen authority figure, anything to stay connected to the business he loved. Triple H's response: "We'll be in touch." That was 18 months ago. They never called back. Never followed up. Just left Mark Henry hanging like he was some enhancement talent instead of a future Hall of Famer who helped build the company's modern era. The disrespect didn't stop there. When Mark Henry made his last WWE appearance in 2023, it was a throwaway segment that lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes for a man who gave WWE decades of his life. They didn't even promote his appearance. Didn't market it as a special attraction. Just threw him out there like an afterthought and moved on to the next segment. But here's what's really going to make your blood boil: that same show featured a 15-minute segment promoting a celebrity guest appearance by someone who had never been in a wrestling ring. 15 minutes of TV time for a celebrity. 3 minutes for Mark Henry. That's how much WWE valued his contribution in the end. The wrestling podcast circuit that claims to love wrestling history somehow never had time for Mark Henry either. Joe Rogan, who talks about wrestling constantly, never had him on. The major wrestling podcasts with millions of downloads never reached out. The YouTube wrestling channels that analyze every minor storyline development never bothered to interview one of the most legitimate athletes in wrestling history. But they'll all post their tributes today. They'll all claim they were fans. They'll all pretend they cared about Mark Henry's legacy while they were ignoring him when he was alive and needed their support. Here's the truth about Mark Henry's final years that nobody wants to admit: he was blackballed. Not officially, not explicitly, but systematically excluded from opportunities because he didn't play the political games that modern wrestling requires. He didn't have the right agents, the right connections, the right social media presence. He was old school in an industry that increasingly values everything except wrestling ability and genuine character. The most infuriating part: Mark Henry never changed who he was to fit the modern wrestling landscape. He remained the same humble, hard-working, respectful man he'd always been. He didn't create controversy to stay relevant. He didn't burn bridges to get attention. He didn't throw other wrestlers under the bus to elevate himself. He maintained his dignity and professionalism right up until the end. And that's exactly why the wrestling industry failed him. Because in today's wrestling world, being a good person and a great wrestler isn't enough. You need to be a social media star, a political player, a self-promoter who never stops hustling for the next opportunity. Mark Henry was none of those things because he was better than that. The heart attack that took Mark Henry's life today wasn't just a medical event. It was the culmination of years of stress, financial pressure, and systematic disrespect from an industry that should have been supporting him. The same industry that's now rushing to claim his legacy with their fake tributes and hollow condolences. You know what would have been a real tribute to Mark Henry? Giving him work when he needed it. Showing him respect when he was alive. Recognizing his contributions before he was gone. But that would have required the wrestling industry to actually care about its legends instead of just exploiting their memories for content. The saddest part about Mark Henry's death is that it was preventable. Not the heart attack itself, but the circumstances that led to it. If WWE had offered him a proper contract, if AEW had shown basic respect, if the wrestling community had supported him when he needed it, Mark Henry might still be alive today, teaching young wrestlers, sharing his knowledge, and continuing to contribute to the sport he loved. Instead, we have a wrestling legend dead at a time when he should have been enjoying his golden years, surrounded by the respect and financial security he earned through decades of service to the wrestling business. We have a man who could legitimately claim to be the strongest person in the world reduced to scraping for indie bookings while inferior talent gets million-dollar contracts. The wrestling industry failed Mark Henry, and his death is a permanent reminder of that failure. No amount of posthumous tributes can change that fact. No amount of social media posts can undo the disrespect he endured in his final years. No amount of Hall of Fame ceremonies can give him back the opportunities he deserved when he was alive to enjoy them. Mark Henry's legacy isn't just his strength records or his wrestling achievements, it's also a damning indictment of how the wrestling industry treats its legends. His death should be a wake-up call for every wrestling fan, every wrestling promoter, every wrestling media personality who claims to care about the sport's history and its greatest performers. But it won't be. Because the wrestling industry doesn't learn from its mistakes. It just moves on to the next story, the next controversy, the next opportunity to exploit nostalgia for profit while ignoring the living legends who need support today. Mark Henry deserved better. He deserved respect, he deserved opportunity, he deserved the support of the wrestling community he served for over 25 years. Instead, he got ignored, overlooked, and ultimately forgotten until it was too late to matter. The world's strongest man is gone, and the wrestling world is weaker for it. Not just because we lost his strength, but because we lost our chance to show him the respect he earned and deserved. That's the real tragedy of Mark Henry's death, not just what we lost, but what we failed to give him while he was still here to receive it. If you're not angry about this, then you're not paying attention. If this doesn't make you furious about how the wrestling industry operates, then you don't understand what we just lost. Mark Henry was more than a wrestler, he was a symbol of everything good about professional wrestling, and his death is a reminder of everything wrong with it. The tributes will pour in today, the social media posts will multiply, and the wrestling world will pretend it always respected Mark Henry. But the truth is different. The truth is that Mark Henry died without receiving the respect he deserved from the industry he loved. And that's a shame that will follow professional wrestling forever. Rest in peace, Mark Henry. You deserved so much better than what this industry gave you. The world's strongest man has finally found peace, but the wrestling world has lost something irreplaceable. Your legacy will outlive all the people who failed to appreciate you when you were here to see it. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me. What happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the Wrestling News CC family, where the real stories of WWE come to life. See you in the next one.